So, on the 11th of June this year, 2019, the UK Prime Minister Theresa May said that she was going to enshrine net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 into law. But what does this mean? Net zero. So what she means is that she's making an amendment to the 2008 Climate Change Act, which already has an 80% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2050 compared to 1990. And she's going to change that from 80% reduction to 100% reduction. And according to parliament.uk, this means that the total emissions of greenhouse gases will be equal to or less than the emissions removed from the environment. So we're not going to put any more in than we are taking out. So what does this mean in practical terms? Well, it will enshrine in law net zero greenhouse gases by 2050. The law will mostly protect it from government regime change. It will make it a lot harder to renege on this. And within 30 years, the UK should no longer contribute to climate change. So what she's doing is she's making a small amendment to a percentage in an existing law. So it doesn't have to go through the House of Commons. It doesn't have to be passed by the House of Lords. It'll just be changed, and that will be it. But what does this mean for climate change? And what does this mean for the world? What does this mean for the UK? Well, it's a huge cross-party move to tackle climate change. The deniers are treated as skeptics now. People generally in this country accept climate change happens and we have to do something. It's an important signal to clean energy and efficient energy investors and business in general to clean up their act, and where they're a fossil fuel intensive industry, they have to find clean energy solutions, or certainly vastly more efficient energy solutions. And something that makes me really happy is the UK is the first country to legislate for net zero. It's really a reason to be proud of Britain. So what are the cons? Is it worth the paper it's written on? Well, it does have two get out of jail clauses. One is the use of international carbon credits, and the other is a 5-year review mechanism. And there's no costed detailed plan as yet, and other countries are committed to doing it faster, such as Norway. So what are international carbon credits, or carbon units as they're also known? Well, the idea is that you offset emissions by trading your emission allowances with other countries, such as what we do with the EU Emissions Trading Scheme, or the ETS. So if we are, or a company is a low emitter, then you trade your emissions with somebody who is a high emitter. Or if we as a country are producing more greenhouse gases than we are sucking in, then we trade it with countries who are not. Of course, this doesn't help the overall world, but it does put a cap on overall emissions to a certain level. So the government have said in their press release on 12th of June that using international credits within an appropriate monitoring, reporting and verification framework is the right thing to do. So they sound like they're going to use this system. But then at the same day, Greg Clark, the Secretary of State for Business, said in his statement to the House of Commons when he introduced formally net zero by 2050, we do not intend to use them. So we've got them, but we don't intend to use them. And the Committee on Climate Change are pretty clear about the use of carbon credits, as they said in their report in May this year. Committing to net zero will reaffirm the Act's strength, but it is essential that the commitment is comprehensive, achieved without use of international credits, and covering international aviation and shipping. I met with Claire Perry, the Clean Energy Minister, last week, and she said they didn't really know what to do about aviation and shipping there. So the will is there, but what they do about it at the moment is less clear. So what's a 5-year review mechanism? Well, Greg Clark said, "We will use the review mechanism contained in the Act within 5 years to confirm that other countries are taking similarly ambitious action and ensuring that our industries do not face unfair competition." So in other words, the UK can pull out of this commitment to net zero if other countries aren't following suit. Now, before you cry and throw sticks at the government, for balance, we have to look at our overall contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and to climate change, and we are 1% of the whole world. So we don't want to tank our economy for the sake of our 1% if other countries aren't following suit, because we may end up with a country in a worse situation than other countries out there. So we have to be mindful that the UK government has a responsibility, and they've got some very, very difficult juggling act to do. But really, is it all government double talk? Well, it's unclear how the government can commit to net zero emissions and still put in planning for a third runway at Heathrow, which they've done in the last couple of days. You can see the artist's impression of what it's going to look like, with the sun setting beautifully over the new airport, ignoring the fact that rivers will have to be rerouted and other such things. The government supports fracking. It's put a moribund on onshore wind, and it's still opening new coal mines. But let's balance this on the wins by the UK. And this is a letter. This is part of a letter that was sent to a CCL member. It was prepared by Claire Perry MP, and it was sent from the Department of Business. At the moment, as I speak, Chris Skidmore is the interim Energy and Clean Growth Minister while Claire Perry takes leave. So she's written 10 climate actions to celebrate. So 2008 Climate Change Act, obviously a good one. Since then, net zero being put into the climate change could be added to that. And she's right, no other major industrialised country has done more than the UK to cut carbon dioxide intensity and greenhouse gases. We are ending coal use. So by 2025, UK will have no coal-powered electricity generation. And part of this was to establish the Powering Past Coal Alliance with Canada, who has already got a carbon fee and dividend in place, of course. Clean energy now gives us over 50% of our total electricity. We have the world's largest offshore wind capacity. I was reading last week that a offshore wind farm now has just had installed a battery the size of a football pitch. And this is super important because it means that wind will be able to feed properly into the national grid rather than being beholden to when wind blows and when it doesn't. There are 400,000 green collar jobs in the UK. The government is investing 2.5 billion in low carbon technology. We were the first country to declare the climate emergency. And we have just learned yesterday, so that will be the 18th of June, that we have won our bid to host the UN's COP 2020 conference. So that's the climate negotiations. So there are much to be happy about. So how have people reacted to this? Well, in a leaked letter from Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, to Theresa May, he said that this is going to cost £1 trillion. Caroline Lucas, in her column in The Guardian, the Green Party MEP for Brighton Pavilion, said that she thinks these are green-tinged tweaks to business as usual. Lord Deben, chair of the Committee on Climate Change, said they were very excited about it, but it is just the first step. It's got to be supported by policy. It's got to formally include international aviation and shipping. So what next? What can you do? Well, at CCL, we push carbon fee and dividend as an excellent way to cut down emissions. So please do write to or visit your MP or influencers such as scientists, economists, business leaders, representatives of business, and say that you think carbon fee and dividend will contribute greatly to net zero and is the best carbon pricing policy, especially as the government is consulting on the future of carbon pricing at the moment. So instead of the fairly ineffectual emissions trading scheme, we could have carbon fee and dividend, which will bring down greenhouse gases by 40% in a few years, doesn't rely on carbon credits, i.e. trading emissions. The border adjustments will stop the export of emissions to other countries. It encourages other countries to adopt the same policy to avoid paying the fee. All of these things would be multiplied exponentially if the whole of the EU adopts this, and this is something that CCL's working on. And it gives the fee back to UK citizens so they aren't penalised during the transition period. This is especially important if you live in Wales or Scotland in the devolved administrations. They are worried that any new tax will take money from the hands of Welsh and Scottish and give it to Westminster. Well, with this particular fee, it will go back into the pockets of the Welsh and the Scottish. And of course, it covers all emissions from the burning of fossil fuels rather than about 30% of emissions that the ETS does. So good luck with your letter. If you do write to the policymakers, by which I mean the Department of Business, please do email Chris Skidmore MP, who is the interim Energy and Clean Growth Minister at the Department of Business, saying you think carbon fee and dividend is the best carbon pricing policy for the UK. As I said before, they're currently doing a consultation on the future of carbon pricing. The consultation deadline is the 11th of July. This is for what happens when we leave the EU. So it's really important that they get lots of responses talking about carbon fee and dividend. Don't forget to put a link to the policy and email it to this particular email address. Do copy in your MP so they know what's going on, so they know what your wishes are. And include your name, address, telephone number, and business sector or name if that's applicable. If you're coming from a business, you're a business owner, that's even more important, especially if it's a fossil fuel intensive business. So if you want to find out more, we've also got a Google Doc with links to reports and news items and reactions and all that sort of stuff. Then go and look at citizensclimatelobby.uk/news. Thank you.